I am one of your hosts, Aaron Freeman, joined by my co-host Scott Karasik. We are back this week to review the Falcons' loss to the Buffalo Bills. We're going to talk a little bit about what needs to happen during the bye week for the Falcons to get their season back on track. And as usual, we will answer your mailbag questions at the end of the show and throughout the show. But as usual, we always start off the show talking about any sort of roster moves the Falcons have made in the past week since we did the show, given that we had an extra 2 days off. Thought there might be more moves this week, but there weren't. The one major move that the Falcons did make, they wound up putting defensive lineman Jack Crawford, a friend of this show, on IR, probably ending his season. It sounds like he's going to have season-ending bicep surgery, so he won't be a candidate to come back in 8 weeks. And the Falcons also worked out 5 defensive linemen on Monday.
6.
And 6?
Yeah, you miscounted.
Oh, yeah, you're right. I can't do math. They worked out 6 defensive linemen on Monday. Thought they would probably wind up signing one of those guys this week, but maybe they'll wait through the weekend or whatever. But Scott, let's talk about Jack Crawford going on IR. How big a blow is this to the Falcons' defensive line rotation?
It depends on what happens with who they sign. All the names that they signed are great athletes, strong guys, fast guys. The only guy that's not really in that mold is probably Sterling Bailey, who's an average athlete. But I do think that they'll be fine without Jack Crawford. I think the more important guy to get back is Upshaw. He knows the defense. And I think between Upshaw, Crawford, and Derek Shelby, you have 3 guys that are all basically the same dude. So you don't have as much redundancy on the roster, but I think they'll be fine.
Yeah, I think this hurts definitely the rotation. We already knew that they had a big blow at defensive tackle when they wound up, when Rashid Hageman got suspended and then he wound up getting cut. They were already thin at that point, and this only makes them thinner. Getting Upshaw back potentially for week 6 against Miami will definitely be a boost and sort of help replace Jack Crawford. I think it's interesting because you look at most of the 6 guys that they worked out, with the exception of maybe Bailey and Nick Williams. All those guys are more sort of 5-tech, strong side defensive end candidates. Maybe Lower Bar Edwards would probably be more of a Leo. But it sounds like probably the plan, at least based off of the workouts, that they would look at someone like a Devin Taylor to potentially be the backup behind Derek Shelby at that strong side defensive end and move Upshaw more full-time inside like he was to start in 2016. And so I think the depth is a big blow. I think Crawford was a big impact guy because I think besides obviously Grady Jarrett and maybe Adrian Claiborne, who wasn't getting a ton of reps inside since Vic Beasley got hurt. But I think Jack Crawford was definitely the team's second best interior pass rusher so far this season. I think Poe's done some good things as a pass rusher, but I do think Crawford's a little bit more reliable just because he can go, his motor doesn't quit, and that's something that, Poe, not to say that Poe's taking plays off, but he's not necessarily he likes his fellow, so he has a tendency to wear down the more he's played, and he has played a lot the last 2 weeks. So I think this is a pretty big blow. I think the Falcons can potentially replace Crawford a little bit. I think, they'll ask more from Joe Villano. They'll ask more from Courtney Upshaw, but I do think at this point Crawford is better than both of those guys. So I don't expect it to be a net positive for the Falcons moving forward.
It's not going to be a net positive, but I don't think they're losing that much because I think Crawford was only playing something like 10, 15% of the snaps. So while it does suck to lose him, I don't think they're losing a ton of snaps out of him.
Fair enough. All right. I think we answered Bruce's question about Crawford going on IR. I guess we'll answer it. Bruce asked, Big Boy Brewski asked, who would you like to be on the roster now that Crawford is on IR?
Honestly, I prefer Devin Taylor out of all the guys there. I think he's the best athlete. I think he's shown the most. I'd love to see what he could do with Dan Quinn teaching him and using him on an interior role as well as an exterior role, especially since he's bulked up to around 285 at this point. I do think he's the best player that they worked out of that whole group. If they decide to go with anybody else, I hope they go with Nicholas Williams, he played at Samford. Dude's a massive athlete, and I'd love to see him play in Atlanta. And I think once he learned how to use his hands, he'd be great. He's just a big 315-pound dude who can move like the wind. He fits their idea of speed up front with Poe and Jarrett, and he's the same kind of athlete those guys are, where Villano isn't really that kind of athlete. And I think once he learned the scheme, he'd be really good.
Fair enough. Yeah, I think, from a talent standpoint, definitely Taylor is the best. I do think the Falcons don't need to add some beef in the inside. I'd rather get a full-time DT, just because I think between Claiborne, Tack, Shelby, and Brooks Reed, and even Upshaw potentially, I think you're good on the outside. And I think we've seen the last couple of games. I think Poe is he wore down a little bit in that Bills game. I think not having, and really Crawford wasn't necessarily a true defensive tackle, and having to rely on Joe Villano and having to rely on maybe even Ben Garland a little bit. I do think the Falcons need a bigger body on the inside to sort of help out with the run defense, which sort of struggled last week against Buffalo. All right, so let's talk about that Bills game. Obviously, as you guys know, the Falcons lost 23-17. Some of the key stats from the game: the Falcons turned the ball over 3 times. Maybe one of them wasn't necessarily. People agreed that it should have been a turnover on that sack, strip, fumble, return touchdown, but it was. The Bills turned that into 13 points. We saw the Falcons' offense have success on the ground. They had 149 rushing yards. 79 of those came from Tevin Coleman on 9 carries. Coleman had all 3 of the Falcons' 20-plus yard plays, 222 yards from scrimmage combined from both Coleman and Devontae Freeman. Another critical aspect of the game was a 19-play, 82-yard scoring drive from the Bills that ate 11 and a half minutes of clock off the game clock when there was only 23 and a half minutes left in the game. And so that sort of drive really sort of took away 2 offensive possessions from the Falcons, and I think really was a little bit of a backbreaker coming on the heels of that turnover that was returned for a touchdown and whatnot. So I think that, those 15 minutes of the game really sort of swung the momentum heavily in the Bills' favor. And, kudos to the Bills for outplaying the Falcons and pulling off the W. So we got a bunch of questions about this game, as is often the case when the Falcons lose. The first one is from Big Boy Brewski. He says, who you thought performed well on offense and defense against the Bills?
I mean, on offense, I've got to give that to Tevin Coleman. He probably played the best of anybody in that game. He was explosive. He was the reason why they were even in it at the end. On defense, Grady Jarrett, that man is every week just wrecking havoc in the backfield, or he's eating a double team. Like, it's either one or the other every single snap.
Yeah, I think for me, Jarrett, I think Keanu Neal played great as well. I think he dislocated or broke his finger or something, and missed a couple of snaps in the second half, but came right back in and sort of gutted through that, pulled the Ronnie a lot maybe, and was really one of the few defenders I thought for the Falcons that was really a force against the run on Sunday. I think offensively, obviously Tevin Coleman, I thought Devontae Freeman had a good game as well. I'll give credit to Wes Schweitzer. He performed much better against the Bills' defensive line than I thought he would. I thought he would get destroyed by Kyle Williams and Marcel Darius and I'm blanking on who number 91 is. Oh, was it Jarrell Worthy? I can't remember. But yeah, he had his ups and his downs, but he had much fewer downs than I thought he would have in this game. So it was nice to see sort of Wes Schweitzer improve this week and not have sort of the struggles that he had we saw in week 1 and some of the earlier games this season. So I'll give those guys credit on offense. Next question about the game comes from Evan Birchfield. He asks, who is the brother of the week, a.k.a. the player that did a lot but won't get the headlines?
I'd have to give it to Dantari Poe. I think the Falcons, outside of that one drive, played great run defense. They were only allowing 3.3 yards per carry. Um, I know Aaron's going to be critical because of that one drive on the run defense, but I think they did a great job on the day. Outside of that one drive, I think they did awesome. He's been an unsung hero despite getting pretty much no stats since he's been here. He had a 5 tackle, 1 tackle for loss kind of game, and was busting through those double teams on the interior and just owning incognito when he was going against them. So I think if anybody gets it, it's Poe.
Okay. I'll give mine for Austin Hooper. I think he had one of his better games. Obviously, didn't put up quite the monster production that he had in Week 1, but I think from a consistency, snap to snap standpoint, I think he had probably one of his better games. Could have had even a better game. I think the Falcons probably underutilized him in the second half a little bit once Julio and Sanu were out, and I think probably using him and Devontae and Tevin to sort of be the guys that facilitated the offense probably would have led to better results than sort of relying on Justin Hardy and Taylor Gabriel and Nick Williams, guys that made a couple of plays. Certainly, Hardy had a touchdown and Nick Williams had a couple of third down conversions. Gabriel was shut out, but I think that sort of played to the Bills' strength because I think the Bills' corners that we went into the game sort of questioning whether these guys were legit, and I think they proved they were legit. Mohamed Sanu was pretty much blanked. I think he had like 1 or 2 catches, and Julio got going early, but that's Julio. So no one faults anybody for giving up plays to Julio Jones. But I think those guys played really well, and I think they did a number on our sort of our backup wide receivers. And I think if Austin Hooper had gotten a little bit more involved in the second half, he would have been a little bit more appreciated. So he's not going to get quite the headlines that he did, but he had a lot of potential to really make some plays in that game, I thought. All right. The opposite question is now coming from low-key Confucius at Jalen Muhammad. He asks, who's the bust of the week?
Where do I begin? I'm just gonna go with Matt Ryan, honestly. He had a couple good passes he had a couple of spots where he should have made better passes. Like that 2nd and 2 where he threw the interception, he had a perfect pocket. He could have found someone better, settled his stealth, and made a good throw. Like, that's on him. And then he was not making the reads that he was supposed to all day. He wasn't on the way he should have been. He only hit like 50-something% of, like 57 or 58% of his passes on the day. He was not having a good day. So if it's anybody, it's Matt Ryan to me. And it happens. It's not going to be perfect every week, but back-to-back weeks of bad games is not
good. Fair enough. For me, it's Deion Jones. Scott was right. I was not a big fan of that 19-play drive. I think, when the Bills basically go 19 plays and run it 13 or 14 times, I don't think you can necessarily. I think, even if the run defense had performed up to par prior to that, which I don't technically believe they did, but I think that pretty much negates the fact that they played well. I just don't think you can give up a 19-play drive and let the team just pound the ball down your throat for 14 of those plays and say the run defense had a good game. And I would say with Deion Jones in particular, one of the big questions we had going into the season was whether or not he would make a significant impact more in the run game than pass game. Most of his big plays last year, most of his splash plays last year, with a few exceptions, were more in coverage and being asked to play in space. And I think, I don't think it's necessarily fully fair to throw him completely under the bus because I think several of the other Falcons linebackers did not play particularly well. But given that he is sort of the leader or one of the leaders of the defense, he's in that middle linebacker spot. And to basically see him, all the only tackles he was making on that drive really seemed to be all downfield ones. I expected better of him. I also think, a lot of for a significant portion of the game, he was asked to spy Tyrod Taylor. And there was a couple of plays where Tyler Taylor really made him look silly and was able to sort of extend drives, um, by getting outside the pocket, and he was unable to make those tackles in the open field. So I think, we need to get more production out of Deion Jones in those situations. He's missed a lot of tackles this year, and I would hope to see a little bit more. I think he's shown growth, don't get me wrong, but I would want to see a little bit more from him. And I thought he would be a big factor in why the Falcons defense would perform better, and I don't think he performed up to par, in my opinion.
I think that's fair.
Evan Birchfield, next question is, can you break down why Charles Clay was so successful against us?
I don't want to, but I'm going to say probably coverage breakdowns and those running back throwbacks on the play action passes. Those are really where he was getting it. It'd be a play action to the right, and they'd throw back to the left on a deep cross. And that was what was eating the Falcons up last year. And without Ricardo Allen out there to really point those out, those were open all day. And that's the real issue.
Well, I think credit goes to Charles Clay. He's an underrated player. And I think part of the reason he's been underrated is because the Bills don't necessarily have sort of a classic sort of passing offense with Tyrod Taylor at the quarterback position. So he's probably not quite to the level of production that he could be if, you had your sort of prototypical Carson Palmer, Matt Ryan-esque passer back there. But I credit goes to Charles Clay. The Falcons linebackers are athletic, but we've seen time and time again this season with Martellus Bennett, with Eric Ebron, even with Deion Sims in week one, like the Falcons are prone to get beat by tight ends. And, with Ebron, he dropped a bunch of those passes. Clay did not drop those passes. And so I just think it's, this is something, given how much we're going to put our guys on islands against these tight ends and wide receivers and running backs, there are going to be opportunities for guys to make plays. And credit goes to Buffalo and Clay, because they did make the plays when they had the opportunity to do so. So I just think it's just downright to him beating us and nothing more than that. Evan Birchfield's next question is your thoughts on the 3rd and 4th and 1 play calling at the end.
I thought on the 3rd and 1, you've got to go with the run there. Otherwise, you're kind of just wasting time. You have the ability to clock it after that, and they chose not to run the ball, and I understand. It doesn't make any sense. On the 4th and 1, that's on Matt Ryan. He had a wide open guy. If he leads Gabriel a little, if he actually puts the ball on Gabriel, that's converted. Or if he throws to anybody else, I think Hooper was wide open on a corner. But there's only so much you can do. But yeah, you got to run the ball on that 3rd and 1, even if it's just a quarterback sneak, so you can get back to the line real quick. You run it, you sneak it, you get that 1 yard. Then you come back and you do everything up. Then you have a full set of downs, or basically 3 full downs to take a couple of shots at the end zone, and you call that slant to Austin Hooper or something like that. I don't understand why the Falcons aren't trying to bully people with the size that they have. They've got a big tight end in Austin Hooper. They've got a big tight end in Levine Toilolo. Put it up there. Let them use their size. Let this offensive line do what it does best in run block. It's not like Ty Sambrailo was killing it as a pass blocker. Let him run block. That's the one thing he does well, is move forward. So I don't get why they were making those play calls. I don't get why they didn't call any play action in the game, just in general. But you can trace a lot of it to. I don't think the play calls were great. I'll put it that way, at least in that drive.
Fair enough. Yeah, I think for me, I think more the 3rd and 1 was on Matt Ryan. I agree with Scott, though, that running the football in that situation makes a lot of sense. I don't have a problem with them deciding to pass the ball, but I just think there was an opportunity for Matt Ryan to either hit Hooper in the end zone or to check it down to Tevin Coleman, and he didn't pull the trigger on either of those throws. And so I think that was more on him than necessarily a bad play call. But obviously, if you run the football in that situation, it's likely that you convert, given that the Falcons had converted most of their short yardage plays when they ran the ball. I think they were 7 for 7 or 7 for 8 on running the ball on short yardage prior to that point. So, it made a lot of sense to run the football in that situation. I think they were a little bit concerned, given that the last couple of times they had run the ball, they had gotten negative yardage. And, I think generally speaking, in crunch time situations, they're going to probably tend to veer towards putting the ball in Matt Ryan's hands as opposed to somebody else's, which we've seen time and time again over the years. So I can't necessarily fault the team for saying, we got a soon to be $120, $130 million quarterback, and so let's let him go out there and win it for us. The fourth down play, I think that was just a bad play call. I think you don't run. I think the Falcons got caught for not adjusting. I think the Bills came out. They called a timeout prior to that down, made an adjustment, went away from a 9-man box to a 7-man box. The Falcons basically ran the same play that they would have ran against a 9-man box, and the Bills were prepared to defend it, the double slants. I don't think you run a play in that situation in a crunch time where only 2 receivers go out into the routes. I think you got to give your quarterback options. I think you got to give him at least 3, 4, if not all 5 guys running routes in that situation. And the fact is, the Bills, with their solid cornerback play, were able to clamp down on both of those routes, and then the play was basically dead within a second or two of the ball being snapped, and there was really nothing they could do because there were no other options. So I think that was a bad play call more so than the third down play. Vin Cruz asks, how much of Ryan's struggles is on the right side of the line? Do you see Ryan's struggles as something to be worried about, or would it take time to adjust to the new OC?
I think not having Schrader does play a factor for Matt. He's obviously a guy who likes to have that frontside guard or frontside tackle be able to protect him, as we saw in 2013, 2014, when Holmes and when early Schrader were out there, and when Trueblood was out there, Ryan did not feel comfortable in the pocket. And it was very, very hard for him to play effectively. Now, when Schrader got up to speed, he was fine. He's been fine. When he had Tyson Clabo early in his career, he was always feeling protected. Because those guys, Schrader and Clabo, are very similar in what they do well and what they do bad. They're not the best run blockers in zone schemes, but they're great pass protectors. They can hold off a pass rusher one-on-one. They can seal the right side one-on-one. And Ryan relies on that a lot. And they don't have that with Sambrello in there. As good of an athlete as Sambrello is, he's not that guy as a pass protector yet. So that does affect Ryan quite a bit. Now, outside of the first game, Schweitzer's been fine. I don't think he's really struggled that much. So I'm not as worried about Schweitzer as I am Sambrello. Now, when Schrader comes back, I think we'll see a completely different Ryan. And I do think that adjusting to a new team does kind of have its perks. Ryan had a similar adjustment period in 2000.
Okay. I think some of the struggles, particularly on Sunday, it did seem like Ryan did have a little bit of happy feet in that game. Just didn't necessarily trust his protection to hold up on every single on certain snaps. I wouldn't say every single snap. That's not fair. And so I think, one of the knocks on Matt Ryan has been throughout his career, and this wasn't really an issue last year, despite, him taking the most punishment in 2016 than he's ever taken in his NFL career. And so that's another testament to how good Matt Ryan was last season. But generally speaking, over the course of his 9-10 year career, like, if you can hit Matt Ryan early in a game, it'll make him play faster as the game goes on because he tends to show less and less trust in his protection. And I think that was an example of that on Sunday. We saw that a little bit, not to the degree we've seen in past games, but it did seem like he was playing a little fast. So I do think that is partially to blame for some of his struggles, but I don't necessarily know if that's to blame for all of it. I just think it's more of a timing issue, and maybe Julio and Gabriel missing time this summer might explain some of that. And it also just could be that Matt Ryan just isn't playing all that well. We have seen that happen before. Other than last year, that was pretty much the case for most of the previous years. So, I think he'll get out of it. He'll have, maybe he'll have a few more downs than ups this year than we, at least compared to last season. As for Schrader coming back, I do think you're right, Scott. I do think it would help. The concern I'll have with Schrader is, generally speaking, Cameron Wake has eaten his lunch over the course of his career. So coming back against Miami, that will, maybe that game we may not see a huge night and day difference. But in the ensuing weeks, I do think there's a decent chance that having Schrader back will certainly lead to improved play for Matt Ryan as well. So we'll see what happens.
I agree.
All right, let's talk about the bye week. And the Falcons are doing their own sort of self-scouting, looking back at these first 4 games and trying to figure out what they do well, what they aren't doing particularly well, and trying to make improvements on there. So, Scott, let's start off and say, what are the things the team is doing the best through the first quarter of the season?
Well, definitely their run game. I think their run defense has honestly been okay outside of that one drive and those 2 big plays. One drive by Buffalo and those 2 big plays that they allowed in the Bears game to go in. Outside of those, I think the Falcons' run defense has been fine. They just got to refine it and not let teams get 7 yards a clip on one drive over and over and over again. I think the pass defense has honestly been fine. They just got to force more turnovers. They're allowing the 10th lowest yards per attempt despite being passed on the most out of any team in the NFL through 4 weeks. I mean, they've got the ability. They've got to shut down these interceptions. They don't even allow, or they got to shut these drives down with interceptions. They don't even allow that many touchdowns. They've been thrown on the most. They've only allowed 5 touchdowns. So that's ranking in the top 10 for touchdowns allowed. And even in the run game, despite allowing 4.2 yards per carry, that's still average in the NFL. I think once they get it together, they've only allowed 2 touchdowns in the run game. That ranks 5th. So I think as a defense, as a whole, they've done really well this year. They do allow a lot of field goals, so their points per game is right around 22. But I'd rather them allow 22 points a game than what they were allowed the first quarter of last year. We had watching the first quarter last year. About 30. That's a massive. I think defense is gonna.
Scott, your audio's fading out a little bit there.
Sorry, I think keep wrapping up, keep improving your tackling. Overall, the defense looks good though.
Okay. Yeah, I think the running game is sort of, the Falcons probably need to lean a little bit heavier on the running game. I think they've looked good in all the games. I think the play action passing has been very effective when the Falcons have used it. They barely used it on Sunday against the Bills. Technically, I think they used it on 7 plays on Sunday, and it wasn't very effective. One of Matt Ryan's interceptions came on it, and I think he only maybe completed like 2 other passes, and I think they both were for like 9 yards or something like that. So, it wasn't particularly effective on Sunday when they did use it. And, but I do think you're right, Scott, they should have used it more. I think those are the 2 things offensively they need to work on. I do think blitzing, being a little bit more aggressive with their blitzing, I think they've been effective at times using it. But I think because, we're such a heavy man-heavy secondary and with our coverage, I do think they can be a little bit more aggressive to sort of help out with the pass rush, which I don't think, even though I think they had 3 sacks against Tyrod, I don't think it was really all that effective on Sunday. So I think, being a little bit more reliant on blitzing, I think would be a good move, and I think it's been effective so far. And in terms of things that they need to improve on, I do think the run defense needs to be better. I think when teams have been committed to running the football like Chicago and Buffalo have, they have been pretty effective at doing so. I think the tackling has been an issue. I think zone coverage has been an issue. I think when we're asking our guys to play in space and not be, man cover guys, that's when this defense has been most vulnerable at times, it seems like. And I think that was something that was an issue last year, and they sort of made the adjustments. But I think given that we don't have as many rookies playing this year, I don't think we can go with we can continue to sort of rely on having man coverage to have to basically bail us out every single time. And I'd like to see improvement there. So, I just think, guys need to be a little bit more disciplined, a little bit more fundamentally sound. And I think those are the areas that they need to improve on. And if they do, the tackling gets better. I think a lot of the run defense issues will go away. I think some of those zone issues will go away. And all of a sudden, this defense, instead of being a defense that flashes good stuff and has made improvements from last year, it can actually be a legitimate high-level defense that, can legitimately shut down quality offenses and whatnot. I think that takes care of Jalen's question. Brig Boy Brewski asks, any injured player you want back by Miami or wait until we play New England?
I want everybody back by Miami. I want the team to be pretty much healthy heading into Miami. I want to see him destroy Miami. I want to see him make it through Miami completely healthy. And then I want to see him go into New England and destroy New England. So that's my view there.
Yeah, no, even though I just said that he has a tendency to struggle against Cameron Wake, I definitely want Ryan Schrader back. If Ty Sambrailo plays in that game, then I'm going to sit there. I'm going to go into that game saying we're going to lose that game because he's going to wreck our entire offense going up against Ty Sambrailo. So we need Ryan Schrader back in that game. Otherwise, Matt Ryan's not going to make it through that game alive. That's something I can promise you. So, yeah, we need Ryan Schrader back next week. Everybody else, obviously Julio, it sounds like he'll be back. So, but everybody else, it doesn't necessarily need to come back for Miami. I don't think necessarily in order to sort of affect the outcome of that game. I would hope not, but definitely Ryan Schrader has to be come back. He has to get out of that concussion protocol this week. If not, then
he's going to get destroyed by a wily vet who's going to take his arms and make him fall on his own ass multiple times over.
Yeah. I think Cameron Wake will be in a position to set the record for single game sack record, which I think is like 6 or 7. So, that's not going to be pretty. Spooky Woodruff at Corey Woodruff 47. Does the Sterling first drive against Green Bay give you hope the Falcons offense picks back up where it left off when healthy?
Yeah. I mean, I think the Falcons will be fine when they're healthy. You just got to get everybody healthy. I think when healthy, you can't cover anybody on this team because you double Julio, you've got Sanu, you double all the wide receivers. You try to double all the receivers. You got guys coming out the backfield. Double all those guys. You're leaving Cooper wide open in the middle of the field. I mean, it's a tough offense to cover everybody. And I think you've got to get everybody healthy, and this offense will look amazing. The reason why I want to get everybody back from Miami is you get healthy for Miami. They get into a rhythm. They're in that rhythm by the time they get to New England.
Yeah. I think the offense will get back on track. I think last week was a little bit of a hiccup going up against the league's best defense by ranking, and so they proved that they were legit, earned that distinction. It wasn't just simply they were playing bad offenses or mediocre offenses. They are legit, and so I think getting back on track for the Falcons is going to be getting back to sort of their explosive identity. They haven't been quite the same level of explosive this year as they were last year. I think they were, it's a pretty high benchmark to hit. So that's not necessarily a huge surprise, but I do think they need to get back to more play action, passing based offense and sort of utilizing that play action. the two games where the Falcons sort of were allergic to play action passing, they scored a combined 40 points. In the two games where they showed a high volume of play action passing, they scored a combined 64 points. So, I'm no mathematician, but that seems to make a little bit of a difference, So I think that's really what we need to see happen with this team moving forward. Big Boy Brewski asks, what adjustments will DQ make with the bye?
I got no idea, but last year Atlanta went from playing awful defense at the bye to playing amazing defense right after it. So I think the defense is looking pretty good right now. If they get even better, that'll be nice. I think the pass rushing increased the second half of last year. I do think fresh out the bye, Atlanta played one of their best games last year. I can't even remember who it was against, but I know that they destroyed them.
Arizona?
Yeah, it was Arizona. It was 38-19. And they just, coming out the bye, they added a couple wrinkles you weren't expecting. They added Taylor Gabriel on the ball. They added, those screens that we saw Gabriel get away with. Julio was pretty much shut down, and the Falcons still scored 38 points. The defense looked great. The running offense looked great. They forced turnovers. They got sacks. They were hitting quarterbacks all day. It was just an all-around great effort on that day.
Yeah. Adjustments, the one adjustment, as I mentioned earlier, I do think he needs to get in Sark's ear and be like, let's go back to some play action guy. Defensively, I don't know if there needs to be any major adjustments. I think it's just, I think he's going to talk about making tackles and fundamentals and discipline and all those sorts of things, the things that DQ always talks about. And so I think if he can sort of get through to his guys and they can be a little bit more disciplined and a little bit more fundamentally sound, as corny as it sounds, I do think that will reap significant benefits on the defensive side of the ball. So I don't necessarily know if he has to make major adjustments in terms of defensively. I just think they just need to do a better job executing what they're being asked to do. And I think offensively, I do think there needs to be a little bit more adjustments in going back to that, rely on the running game a little bit more. Our running game has been outstanding these last couple of games. And I think, this trying to be this sort of pass-happy offense, losing Patrick DeMarco and sort of transitioning more to a little bit more of a pass-happy 3-wide receiver, let's spread out teams sort of offense, just really hasn't reaped the benefits so far this year. And I just think they just need to go back to what their bread and butter is and rely on that run game, particularly with Schrader coming back, where they should be able to even be more effective on the ground. So I think that's the main adjustment. The offense should go through Devontae Freeman, not Julio Jones.
Sorry for all the dogs running around. To those who are listening, I apologize.
Big Boy Brewski asks, should the NFL consider all teams have a midseason bye in the near future, or they care about ratings more?
Honestly, one thing that the NFL should look into is a 2-bye, 18-week season and give every single solitary team 2 byes. And you can even have it set up where there's an 8-week period right in the middle of the season. Every team's getting a bye. So the first 5 weeks, no bye. The last 5 weeks, no bye. But those right in the middle, you got 4 groups of 8. And each group gets a bye together. So, all your division winners get a bye weeks 6 and 11 or whatever, 6 and 10. And then 7 and 11 is your second place teams, your third place teams, your fourth place teams. And just go down that way. And I think you'd have a much more competitive league with 2 byes and with these players being able to get healthy.
Yeah, I think this I think you're right, Scott. I think this is something that will eventually happen. When it will happen, I have no idea. It could happen, in 2 years. It could happen in 5 years. It could happen in 10 years. But I think, given all the stuff with the CTE and whatnot, and I think that's only going to get worse from here on. As far as like the PR goes with the NFL and sort of, what will people be able to do? Because I heard the report a week or so ago that someone's developing a test where they can test for CTE while people are alive, as opposed to having to wait to examine people's brains after they pass away. And so I think if and when that day arrives, I've heard that test is probably like 5 years away, but I do think eventually the NFL is going to have to try to get ahead of that and go to try to prolong the season and give players more rest time, more recovery time. I think that's an eventuality. We'll see what happens. 2020 is when the CBA is going to be renegotiated, and so that may be a situation where that's something that they put in the new CBA moving forward after that point, and that'll be around the same time where that test should be becoming around available. So I do think that is something that we will see. We will see at least an 18-week season, if not a possible 20-week season, comparable to the CFL, even though they play like 18 games or whatever it is. But yeah, I think eventually they're going to go to that, and I think the NFL, they're not going to lose. Like, it's funny to me how sort of certain things, like, we're like, oh, the NFL is a business and whatnot, but they're like a $13 billion industry. So it's like, $1 million, losing $1 million here or there to the NFL as a whole is functionally meaningless. You just see it with like the salary cap and whatnot, when teams cut guys and are eating like $25 million in dead salary, which they're basically paying nothing towards to players to play. So it's one of those things where it's like if they lose a few $1,000,000 or whatever because the ratings or whatever, they lose a week of ratings, then it's not going to be a big deal to them, really. They're just being greedy if it is. But yeah, so I think that's something that we'll see eventually happen. All right, Scott, before we get to the rest of the mailbag questions, do you have any call-outs this week?
Honestly, no. Nothing that I feel like ranting on with my voice.
I'm the same way. Yeah, I don't really have anything I want to call out. Maybe next week. But, yeah. I'll call out the schedule makers. Why did you have to give us an early bye? That's about, this is the amount of anger I have for that. So that's the closest thing he'll get to a call out. All right, let's get into the rest of the mailbag questions. Our first question comes from Jalen Muhammad. Why do we suck so much?
They don't. They're 3-1. And they played two teams that are 3-1, or three teams that are 3-1 and went 2-1 against them. So I'm pretty sure this Falcons team is pretty damn good. I think part of the reason why they're not looking as great as they did last year is because they played a stronger schedule earlier in the year this year, and they've had injuries.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I'm not going to take this question from Jalen seriously. I know he's messing around. So, yeah, they don't suck. But they got some areas of the roster they got to improve. They got some aspects of their team that they got to improve. We talked about them. So, they'll get it together. Next question from Jalen is, can we fire Sark into the sun yet?
No.
I think SpaceX is working on a new rocket. So when they get that rocket done, I guess we can fire Sark into the sun. Next question from Jalen is, when do we draft another quarterback again?
Now, that's actually a legitimate question because Matt Ryan's, 32 years old?
Yeah.
I mean, I say give it 3 years and then draft somebody.
Okay. I would, depending on what happens with Schaub after this season, if he decides to retire, I would think seriously about using a pick on a quarterback, not necessarily like in the first day or two, but, like a day 3 draft pick, a 4th, 5th round guy that they can sort of, develop for 4 years. By then, Matt Ryan will be about 36. Usually quarterbacks usually hit a wall a little bit around 36, 37. And so at that point in time, if that guy develops, as well as you hope he does, which is probably, technically a low probability. There aren't very many day three starting quarterbacks in the league right now. But if you get lucky and you hit you find a Dak Prescott, you find a Tyrod Taylor, you find that type of guy, Tony Romo or something like that, then you can possibly, pull a Jimmy Garoppolo or Tom Brady sort of situation and sort of stash him as the heir apparent. And if not, then you didn't waste the pick. You roll the dice on a fourth or fifth round pick, and you'll have multiple opportunities to draft another guy down the road. So I think next year is probably the first opportunity for them to pull the trigger. There hasn't been great quarterback classes the last couple of years, at least in terms of the depth of the draft class. But hopefully, I haven't really checked it out, but hopefully next year's draft class is a little different, and maybe they'll get an opportunity to pull trigger in the middle of late rounds. All right. Jalen's next question is, who of the next upcoming free agents do we end up letting walk? My guess is Rico or one of the linebackers, but I don't know.
I'm not going to be very liked for this take on Falcons Twitter, but I do think they let Ricardo Allen walk. Love Ricardo Allen, think he's good, but I do think they see a situation where he's a restricted free agent this year. After that, he's probably gone to make more money, and they've got to have Demonte Casey take that role.
Yeah, I think that's probably the plan, but I think they don't really have to make a long-term decision on Ricardo Allen until 2020, really?
2019. I don't see them franchising him.
Yeah, you're right, 2019, I'm sorry. So, that's basically 2 years before they really have to make a decision. So who knows what happens in the next 2 years. But I think probably you're right. The plan is, I think, to probably develop Casey for 2 years, keep Allen for the next 2 years, and then, probably let him walk, assuming Casey develops. I think, I guess, this is not necessarily factoring like veterans like Claiborne and Poe and Ishmael that are free agents next year and whatnot. So I guess he's asking more sort of the young guys that we've drafted in the last couple of years. Allen's probably the guy that makes the most sense. I don't really have, trying to project who's going to walk a year or two from now, I think is a little premature. At least it's a little premature for me. It's not necessarily something I'm particularly interested in trying to prognosticate who's going to walk. That was something I tried to do with the Robert Alford stuff. Did not work out too well for me on that end. So, I'm not in that business anymore. So we'll cross those bridges when we get to them. As long as they don't spring another sort of Patrick DeMarco type situation on me, then I'll be fine, whatever they decide. Evan Birchfield, seeing that Work Done will be inducted into the Falcons Ring of Honor, what's our favorite Work Done moment?
There was a play back in the day where Work Done he was running the ball in a simple zone stretch, and no one touched him for 90 yards. It was a simple zone stretch, and he just went 90 yards untouched. He found the hole, he weaved through, and just hit top gear and was gone. And if there's a quintessential Work Done play, it's that play.
Yeah, I'm sitting here. I can't, the good Work Done memories go back to 2006. So it's really hard for me to remember specific things that happened over 11 years ago. But I think, sort of not a specific play, but, one of the things that was great about Work Done was sort of, given his lack of size, and one of the reasons why he was sort of underutilized in Tampa Bay and a little bit underutilized in Atlanta. One of the reasons why the Falcons wound up drafting T.J. Duckett, because they didn't think Work Done could be a full-time a RB1, so to speak. And I think one of the great things about Work Done, and one of the reasons why he was able to survive and be as successful as he was, despite having the frame of a guy like Taylor Gabriel, is how good his vision was and how great he was at sort of setting up defenders on the second level when he would get on those zone runs back in the DD Jim Moore days, and sort of just you could just see him sort of operating at a level that was two steps ahead of some defenders and setting those guys up to miss with sort of the subtle moves and you see Devontae doing that stuff now. And so like those are some of my favorite Work Done moments where he would just like, not necessarily bust off these long runs or anything like that, but just like a very smooth 7-yard run where he's just like he's able to avoid the big hits, the big sort of decleating shots because he's so good at sort of the subtleties of the running back position and movement, and as Dimitrov would say, fluidity and movement and all those sorts of things. So, those are the things I remember about Work Done. Joshua Hammond at Whisper 2000, he asks, why is Matt Ryan so inaccurate with the deep shots? And Falcons Fury Southlight Gold has a similar question.
So the deep ball inaccuracy goes back to Taylor Gabriel and Julio Jones not being healthy during training camp and preseason. He didn't have the ability to get his timing down with them. Those are those shots that he's inaccurate on more than anything else. I think once he gets his timing down with those guys, once those guys are fully healthy, it'll be fine. But that has a lot to do with it.
Yeah, I mean, it's weird because early in Matt Ryan's career, he was not a very good deep ball thrower. The last couple of years, he's been one of the better, at least statistically. I partially think a lot of that is owed to just Julio Jones being like the best receiver at the catch point in the league. And so a lot of times you can just sort of throw it up and Julio will go get it. And so it seems more like Matt Ryan is looking like his younger self, where he's overthrowing receivers, not really throwing, when he's throwing it towards the sideline, not really throwing passes that are really catchable to some of his receivers and whatnot. So I think Scott's right. Some of it has to be owed to not having those guys in training camp and sort of the timing being off a little bit. I think some of that may be because, just the subtle tweaks that Sarkisian has implemented in the offense. He's not fully comfortable as he was a year ago. And so that's causing some of the issues. Some of it may be not having enough confidence in the protection and his throwing off his footwork and whatnot. And we've seen some games, some throws where Matt Ryan has had a hard time resetting his feet and missing some relatively easy throws because of it. So I think there's a lot of factors. And, my expectation is it will get better as the season wears on. So we'll see. Okay. The next question is, sorry, my thing was messing up. Is there any particular reason for the turnovers the last 2 weeks? I don't think it's Matt's fault, but he seems off. Maybe it's the offensive line play.
I think part of it's the offensive line play. I think part of it is the Falcons just are off on timing right now. I really think that's all it is. And I do also think that it's a lack of focus by the players. Coleman should have focused that ball in. Sanu should have focused that ball in. Like, that's just, those are on those two guys. And then it was just inaccurate on that ball that bounced off Nick Williams' hands.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of if there's anything else I can add to that. It's just guys not catching passes, throws being a little bit off. The Gabriel pick was on Matt Ryan. The what was the pick? The Glover Quinn pick against Detroit, that was on Matt Ryan. But the rest of it was, I would say, more on the wide receiver than the quarterback, even though the quarterback may be slightly to blame on some of those throws, not necessarily throwing a great pass. But I still think most of those balls were pretty catchable from that perspective. So,
I do think there's a little bit of dumb luck involved.
Yeah.
Especially with like that Nick Williams tip. That's dumb luck. That ref missing the call on the incomplete pass, that's dumb luck. The fact that the review team didn't see enough to overturn, that's dumb luck. Sanu, Ullman, both those guys just popping, the ball just popping up right off. That's dumb luck. Any other season, that ball goes right to the ground. And it's just a drop. So, shit happens. What can you do?
There you go. All right, guys, that's it for today's show. We appreciate everybody that hung into there and listening to us and watching us on Thursday as opposed to our usual Tuesday show. We will be back next Tuesday at our usual time, hopefully, assuming Scott's car just decides to function. No shade there, Scott. But if you want to get your mailbag questions in, use the hashtag Falcons Mailbag on Twitter. Tweet at the show. That's Falcons PFC. I am at FalcFans. Scott is at Karasik S. You can also find out all the information about the show at ProFootballCentral.com. If you want to know what the new iTunes feed is, you can check it out there. All the links are there. Give us a like on Facebook at Falcons Central Radio. You can also check out the Pro Football Central YouTube page. Give us a thumbs up if you're checking us out on there. Make sure you subscribe as well. And we will be back next week to talk about the upcoming matchup with the Miami Dolphins.